The soft evening light filtered through the crystal chandeliers of Golden Leaf, Manhattan's most exclusive Asian fusion restaurant. Amidst the gentle clink of fine china and muted conversations of New York's elite, Isabel Reyes moved with practiced grace between tables. At 26, the Filipino waitress had mastered the art of becoming nearly invisible, seen only when needed, her warm brown eyes never betraying the exhaustion of rising at dawn to care for her ailing mother before working a 12-hour shift. Tonight, the familiar scent of ginger and star anise from the kitchen mingled with expensive perfumes worn by patrons who spent more on a single meal than Isabel earned in a week. She adjusted the crisp collar of her uniform, smoothed back a strand of dark hair that had escaped her neat bun, and continued her careful dance between tables. "Table 7 needs fresh napkins," whispered May, another waitress, as they passed in the narrow corridor leading to the kitchen. The older woman's eyes held the knowing look of someone who recognized exhaustion in another. "And Mr. Chen sent back his soup." Again, Isabel nodded, her shoulders straightening as she gathered fresh linen napkins. 5 years ago, she had arrived in America with dreams of completing her linguistics degree at Columbia University. She'd been only a year away from graduation when her mother, Elena, was diagnosed with a rare heart condition, requiring experimental treatments far beyond their means. Now Isabel's world had narrowed to hospital rooms and restaurant tables, her exceptional mind hidden behind a carefully maintained mask of quiet efficiency. "Isabel," Patrick, the floor manager, approached with unusual urgency in his step. "Sullivan, table 1, everything perfect." He emphasized each word as though speaking to a child rather than someone who'd been working there for 3 years without a single complaint. Isabel froze momentarily. William Sullivan, tech mogul and CEO of Sullivan Industries, whose upcoming merger with a Chinese corporation was front-page news. His name appeared regularly in the business section of newspapers Isabel read during her subway commutes, most recently regarding a multi-billion-dollar deal with Lianglong Technology. "I can handle table 3 instead," offered May, misreading Isabel's hesitation for nervousness. Isabel shook her head. "No, I've got it." She couldn't afford to lose the tips from the restaurant's prime table. Her mother's medication had increased again last month. As she approached with menus, Isabel observed the party with the careful eye she'd developed from years of study in linguistics and anthropology. William Sullivan moved with the confident air of someone who had never worried about medical bills or overdue rent. His tailored suit likely cost more than 6 months of Isabel's rent, but it was his eyes that caught her attention sharp, assessing, missing nothing. Beside him walked Victoria Blackwood, his fiancée and daughter of his company's largest investor, diamonds glittering at her throat, her perfume announcing her presence seconds before she did. They were followed by a severe-looking man clutching a leather portfolio, George Lawson, Sullivan's right-hand man, Isabel recalled from business magazine profiles. His thin lips seemed permanently set in disapproval, eyes constantly scanning the room as though expecting threats from behind every potted plant. "Good evening," Isabel greeted them with practiced warmth. "Welcome to Golden Leaf." William Sullivan barely glanced at her, ordering an expensive champagne while Victoria dismissed her presence entirely. Before Isabel could retreat, her phone vibrated in her pocket, 3 long buzzes, the emergency code from the hospital. The weight of dread settled in her stomach. "Excuse me," she said, already stepping away. "I'll send someone else to take your order." "Wait," Sullivan commanded, unused to being walked away from. "We haven't ordered yet." "Family emergency, sir, I apologize." Isabel hurried to the service corridor, hands trembling as she answered the phone. Dr. Patel's voice was tense. "Ms. Reyes, your mother's having complications. The experimental medication isn't working as expected. We need your consent for a different protocol." The hallway seemed to narrow, the sounds of the restaurant fading away. "What are the risks?" "The costs?" Isabel asked, heart racing. "Similar risks but potentially more effective, about 30% more expensive. 30% more than what already consumed every penny of her savings and kept her working double shifts." Isabel closed her eyes, leaning against the wall. "Do it," she said, voice catching. "I'll figure something out." When Isabel returned, the Sullivan party was waiting impatiently. She took their complicated orders with perfect composure, noting Victoria's salad with 6 specific modifications. As she finished, her phone vibrated again, not the hospital this time, but a number with a Chinese country code. her language exchange partner in Beijing, probably wondering why she'd missed their scheduled practice session. Isabel declined the call, but it rang again immediately. With an apologetic glance at the increasingly irritated table, she answered in flawless Mandarin. "Wei, this isn't a good time," she began, turning slightly away. The voice on the other end launched into rapid-fire Mandarin about business negotiations and technology licensing agreements. Isabel frowned, confused by the unfamiliar male voice. "I think you have the wrong number," she replied in perfect Mandarin, conscious of Sullivan's party watching her. "I'm not involved in any semiconductor patent negotiations." The caller persisted, mentioning contract terms and deliverables. Isabel's linguistic training allowed her to follow the technical terminology, but the context remained bewildering. "Look," Isabel said firmly, still speaking Mandarin with impeccable pronunciation, "I don't know who you're trying to reach, but I'm a student who works as a waitress. I don't have access to any technology patents." She ended the call and turned back to find all three diners staring at her, with expressions ranging from surprise to calculation. The silence stretched uncomfortably as Isabel tucked her phone away. "You speak Mandarin?" Sullivan asked, really seeing her for the first time. "Yes," she answered simply. "I was a linguistics major before I had to leave school. Chinese languages are my specialty." Something shifted in Sullivan's gaze, a calculating interest that made Isabel instinctively wary. Victoria's perfectly sculpted eyebrows lifted slightly, while George Lawson's eyes narrowed with sudden suspicion. "An interesting coincidence," Lawson said, his voice dripping with skepticism. "A waitress who speaks perfect Mandarin serving the CEO negotiating a Chinese merger." Sullivan silenced him with a slight gesture. "Bring our food," he instructed Isabel, returning to his previous dismissive tone. The rest of their meal passed with Sullivan watching Isabel's movements with thoughtful interest. As they finished dessert, he handed her his business card. "Sullivan Industries, my office, 9 a.m. tomorrow. We have a proposition for you." Isabel stared at the embossed card. "I have another job in the mornings." "Cancel it," he said simply. "This will be worth your time." After they left, Isabel's phone rang again. It was Dr. Raymond Holmes, an American specialist her mother's primary physician, had reluctantly referred them to a man with connections to experimental treatments and an unsettling manner that always left Isabel feeling as though she'd agreed to something she didn't fully understand. "I understand there's been a change in your mother's treatment today," he said smoothly. "Perfect timing, actually. I could use your help with something small." As Isabel ended the call, Patrick approached, his expression grim. "My office. Now." 20 minutes later, Isabel walked out of Golden Leaf for the last time, her small box of personal items clutched to her chest, terminated for disrupting a VIP customer experience. The cold April rain soaked through her thin jacket as she stood at the bus stop, staring at Sullivan's business card and wondering how her life had unraveled so completely in a single evening. The Sullivan Industries Tower dominated the Manhattan skyline like a gleaming monument to success. 72 floors of glass and steel reflected the morning sunlight, turning the building into a beacon, visible from miles away. Isabel stood on the sidewalk across the street, her gaze traveling upward until her neck ached from the angle. Inside that building, decisions worth billions of dollars were made daily by people who never had to check their bank balance before buying groceries. After a sleepless night at her mother's hospital bedside, Isabel felt woefully underprepared in her only pencil skirt and department store blazer. Dark circles shadowed her eyes despite her best efforts with concealer, and her damp hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail after her apartment building's hot water had cut out mid-shower. "You don't have to do this," she whispered to herself, clutching the strap of her worn leather satchel. The business card in her pocket seemed to burn against her thigh. William Sullivan was not a man accustomed to having his invitations declined, but Isabel was not without options. She could find another restaurant job. Perhaps the Italian place in the village was still hiring. But the memory of Dr. Holmes's voice haunted her. "Your mother's new treatment protocol is quite expensive, Ms. Reyes. I've made an exception to include her, but I do expect favors to be repaid." Isabel squared her shoulders and crossed the street. The lobby of Sullivan Industries was a study in calculated intimidation. 30-foot ceilings soared overhead, the marble floors so polished they reflected the crystal chandeliers like still pools of water. Ancient Chinese artifacts were displayed in museum-quality cases, alongside ultra-modern sculptures, a statement of tradition and innovation in perfect balance. Isabel Reyes for William Sullivan, she told the security guard, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. After a brief phone call, she was escorted to an elevator that required a special key card. The guard swiped his badge, pressed the button for the 70th floor, and stepped back. "Good luck," he said, with a cryptic smile that did nothing to settle her nerves. The elevator rose with stomach-dropping speed, opening directly into a reception area where a poised woman in her 50s sat behind a desk that appeared carved from a single piece of marble. "Ms. Reyes," the woman acknowledged with a professional nod. "Mr. Lawson will see you first." George Lawson's office was a stark contrast to the warmth of the reception area. All hard lines and monochromatic furnishings, it reflected its occupant's personality perfectly. He gestured for Isabel to sit without rising from behind his imposing desk. "Our head interpreter, Chen, suffered a stroke yesterday," Lawson said without preamble. "He's stable but unable to work. We have critical negotiations with Liang Long next week. Billions are at stake." Isabel blinked, processing the abrupt information. "I'm sorry about Mr. Chen, but why am I here?" "Standard background check," Lawson replied coolly, sliding a tablet across the desk. On the screen was Isabel's academic record. Former linguistics student at Columbia, specialized in Chinese dialects with emphasis on business and technical vocabulary. Nearly perfect academic record until you left to care for your mother. A chill ran through Isabel. "How did you—" "We're a technology company, Ms. Reyes. Information is our business." Lawson's thin smile didn't reach his eyes. "Your performance at the restaurant was convenient." "It wasn't a performance," Isabel said, anger flaring. "I answered a phone call." "Indeed." Lawson studied her as though she were a puzzle with mismatched pieces. "And now you have an opportunity. Mr. Sullivan is prepared to offer you a temporary position as an interpreter for the duration of the Liang Long negotiations. 2 weeks, possibly 3. "I have no experience as a professional interpreter," Isabel pointed out. "Your academic record suggests otherwise. Your professors seem to think you were gifted." Lawson's tone made it clear he was reserving judgment on that assessment. The office door opened and William Sullivan strode in. In daylight, he seemed even more commanding than he had in the restaurant's dim lighting. His presence filled the room immediately, drawing all attention like gravity. "Ms. Reyes," he nodded, taking the seat behind his desk as Lawson moved to a position slightly behind him. "I'll be direct. We need someone who speaks Mandarin and understands technical terminology. Our regular interpreter is unavailable, and the negotiations can't be postponed." Isabel maintained eye contact, despite her nervousness. "Mr. Lawson mentioned that. May I ask why you chose me rather than a professional agency?" Sullivan's lips curved in what might have been respect. "Professional interpreters come with professional connections. This merger is sensitive. We need someone with no existing ties to our competitors or to Liang Long. In other words, someone no one would suspect," Isabel translated. "Precisely." Sullivan named a figure that made Isabel's eyes widen. $10,000 for 2 weeks' work. Consider it a consulting fee. $10,000, almost enough for a month of her mother's treatment. Isabel's mind raced through calculations and possibilities. "When would I start?" "Immediately," Sullivan answered, sliding a contract across the desk. Isabel skimmed the dense legal text, noting the extensive confidentiality clauses. Her eyes caught on one particular section. "This says I would accompany you to Beijing for the final phase of negotiations." "Is that a problem?" Sullivan asked, watching her carefully. Isabel thought of her mother in the hospital, of Dr. Holmes's veiled threats. "I'd need assurances that my mother's care would continue in my absence." Something flickered across Sullivan's face, surprise perhaps, at her conditions. "Your mother's medical expenses are your concern, Ms. Reyes. I'm offering you a job, not charity." "I understand," Isabel said, keeping her voice steady. "I'm simply explaining my constraints." Their eyes locked in silent negotiation before Sullivan nodded once. "I'll have human resources arrange for your security clearance. Lawson will get you settled in the translation office. We start tomorrow." After signing the contract, Isabel was led to a small but well-appointed office where translation materials were already waiting. Alone for the first time since entering the building, she sank into the ergonomic chair and tried to process the morning's events. Her phone buzzed with a text from the hospital. Her mother was stable, but asking for her. Just as she was gathering her things to leave for a brief visit, there was a knock at the door. The man who entered resembled William Sullivan enough to be recognizable as family, but where the CEO's features were sharp and commanding, this man's were softer, more approachable. His smile seemed genuine as he extended his hand. "The miracle interpreter," he greeted her. "I'm Derek Sullivan, the less impressive brother. Welcome to the family circus." His handshake was warm and firm. "Reyes, interesting name for someone so fluent in Chinese." "My father was Filipino, my mother half Chinese," Isabel explained, relaxing slightly in his presence. "I grew up speaking 3 languages at home." Derek's expression changed subtly. "Your name seemed familiar when I was reviewing some old company files recently." Before he could continue, Lawson appeared in the doorway, his expression hardening at the sight of Derek. "Mr. Sullivan is waiting for you in the conference room," he said pointedly. "Always at his beck and call." Derek sighed, giving Isabel an apologetic smile. "We'll continue this conversation later." After he left, Isabel wondered about his unfinished sentence. What company files contained her name? And why did George Lawson seem so intent on interrupting their conversation? She gathered her things, mind swirling with questions and possibilities. As she exited the building into the bright spring sunshine, Isabel couldn't shake the feeling that she had just stepped into something far more complicated than a simple interpretation job. Her phone rang again, Dr. Holmes. With a deep breath, Isabel answered, unaware that across the street a figure watched her from the tinted windows of a black sedan, photographing her every move. The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and forced cheer, a combination that always made Isabel's chest tighten. She nodded to the night nurse, Maria, who had become a friend over the long months of her mother's illness. Unlike the specialists with their clinical detachment, Maria treated Elena Reyes with dignity and genuine warmth. "She's having a good evening," Maria said softly, falling into step beside Isabel. "The new medication seems to be helping with the pain." "Thank God for small mercies," Isabel murmured, adjusting the strap of her satchel that now contained translation materials from Sullivan Industries. "Any messages from Dr. Holmes?" Maria's expression darkened slightly. "He stopped by earlier. Didn't stay long." She hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "Isabel, I don't mean to overstep, but something about that man doesn't sit right with me." Isabel glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "With me either, but he's the only one who agreed to include Mom in the experimental protocol." "At what cost, though?" Maria squeezed her arm gently before continuing her rounds. Elena Reyes sat propped against pillows, her once vibrant face now thin and pale, but still beautiful. The television played an old black-and-white movie with the volume low. A small, tabby cat Mochi, the therapy animal that had adopted Elena specifically, lay curled at her feet, purring contentedly. "There's my girl," Elena smiled, holding out her arms. Despite the weakness in her limbs, her embrace remained strong. She smelled of jasmine lotion and the fading traces of the ginger tea Isabel had brought that morning. "How are you feeling?" Isabel asked, settling into the chair beside the bed. Mochi stretched lazily, then padded across the blanket to headbutt Isabel's hand in greeting. "Better than yesterday," Elena replied, the slight accent of her childhood still coloring her English. "But you look tired, Anak. What's happened?" Isabel never could hide anything from her mother. She ran her fingers through Mochi's soft fur, drawing comfort from the cat's rumbling purr, and told Elena about losing her job at Golden Leaf and the unexpected offer from Sullivan Industries. Elena's reaction was not what Isabel expected. At the mention of Sullivan's name, her mother's face paled further, and her fingers twisted nervously in the blanket. Mochi, sensing the shift in emotion, sat up alertly, amber eyes fixed on Elena's face. "Mom, what is it?" "Nothing," Elena said too quickly. "It's a good opportunity. The money will help with the treatments. You know William Sullivan, don't you?" Isabel pressed, recognizing the signs of her mother's distress. "Or the company?" Elena's gaze dropped to her hands. "It was a long time ago, Isabel. Another life." When she looked up again, determination had replaced the momentary fear. "Promise me you'll be careful. That company, there are secrets there." "What kind of secrets?" Isabel leaned forward. Elena shook her head, suddenly looking exhausted. "Just be careful. Trust your instincts." She reached for her daughter's hand. "Now tell me about this interpretation job. Will you be working with Mandarin or Cantonese?" Isabel recognized the deliberate change of subject but didn't push. Her mother needed rest, not stress. She described the project in general terms, careful not to violate the confidentiality agreement she'd signed. As Elena drifted to sleep an hour later, Mochi curled protectively against her side. Isabel sat in the dimly lit room, wondering about her mother's reaction. What connection could Elena possibly have to Sullivan Industries? And why did the mere mention of the name cause such distress? The next morning arrived with relentless spring sunshine and the shrill demand of Isabel's alarm. She dressed carefully in the one business outfit she owned, a navy blue dress purchased for job interviews and conservatively elegant enough for corporate America. The Sullivan Industries ID badge felt foreign against her collarbone as she clipped it to her dress. The translation office assigned to her was small but efficiently arranged, with dual monitors, reference materials, and specialized translation software. Isabel spent the morning familiarizing herself with technical terminology specific to semiconductor patents and licensing agreements. The work absorbed her completely, her linguistic mind easily adapting to the specialized vocabulary. At noon, a light knock at her door revealed Derek Sullivan, bearing a paper bag that smelled tantalizingly of curry. "Thought you might be hungry," he said, setting the bag on her desk. "The cafeteria's decent, but there's a little Thai place around the corner that's spectacular." "Thank you," Isabel said, genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness. "I lost track of time." Derek settled into the visitor's chair with easy grace, unwrapping his own lunch. Unlike his brother, he wore no tie, his collar unbuttoned and sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. "So," he said conversationally, "how's the crash course in tech speak going?" "Surprisingly well," Isabel admitted, taking a bite of fragrant pad thai. "I've always been good with languages, natural or technical." "William mentioned you were a linguistics student." Derek's tone remained casual, but Isabel sensed purpose behind his friendly demeanor. "Columbia, right? Pretty impressive." "I was," she corrected, a familiar pang of regret accompanying the words. Life had other plans. Derek nodded, his expression sympathetic without being pitying. "Life has a way of derailing the best-laid plans. Trust me, I know." He hesitated, then continued in a lower voice. "Listen, about yesterday, when I mentioned your name seeming familiar." Isabel leaned forward slightly. "Yes? I've been going through some old company archives. Accounting records from about 20 years ago." Derek's eyes held hers steadily. "The name Reyes appeared in multiple files. Any chance you have family who worked here?" The curry suddenly tasted like ashes in Isabel's mouth. I don't think so. My mother never mentioned it." But Elena's reaction to Sullivan's name flashed through her mind, contradicting her words. Derek's expression suggested he caught her uncertainty. "Well, it's probably just a coincidence. Reyes isn't an uncommon name." Before Isabel could pursue the conversation, her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Holmes. "Need to discuss your mother's treatment options. Call immediately." Derek noticed her expression change. "Everything okay?" "Just my mother's doctor," Isabel said, already reaching for her phone. "I should take this." "Of course." Derek gathered their lunch containers. "Oh, one more thing, my brother wanted me to remind you about the video conference with Liang Long executives tomorrow morning. 9 sharp. After he left, Isabel called Dr. Holmes, whose smooth voice did nothing to mask the implicit threat in his words. "I understand you found new employment, Ms. Reyes, with Sullivan Industries no less. How fortuitous. Perhaps we could discuss how this might benefit your mother's treatment plan." That evening, after finishing her translations and visiting her mother, Isabel found herself unable to sleep. Derek's mention of her family name in company archives and her mother's reaction to Sullivan Industries nagged at her. Using her new security clearance, she returned to the nearly empty building, the night security guard barely glancing at her ID badge. The archives were housed in the basement level, a climate-controlled maze of physical records and digital storage. Isabel's linguistics training had taught her the value of systematic research, and she began methodically searching for records from the period Derek had mentioned. 3 hours later, her eyes burning from staring at screens and dusty files, Isabel found ETA personnel file for Elena Reyes, dated 20 years earlier. With trembling fingers, she opened the digital folder. The contents stole her breath away. Her mother had indeed worked at Sullivan Industries in the accounting department, but she had left under a cloud of suspicion, accused of orchestrating a complex embezzlement scheme that allegedly triggered the former CEOs William and Derek's father's fatal heart attack. The evidence seemed damning. Transferred funds, altered records, all apparently leading back to Elena Reyes. Yet something felt wrong about the neat package of evidence. Isabel's trained eye noted inconsistencies in the documentation that others might miss, subtle discrepancies in language use that suggested multiple authors for what should have been a single report. As she dug deeper, she discovered that George Lawson had been head of security at the time, personally handling the investigation that implicated her mother. The file contained his recommendation that criminal charges be pursued, though a handwritten note indicated the company had ultimately decided against legal action to avoid publicity. Isabel sat back, mind racing to process this revelation. Her mother, accused of embezzlement and possibly causing a man's death. It seemed impossible to reconcile with the gentle, principled woman she knew. The soft ping of an incoming email interrupted her thoughts. It was from Derek Sullivan, sent minutes ago despite the late hour. Found something you should see. My office, 7 a.m. tomorrow. Come alone. Morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Derek Sullivan's office, casting long shadows across polished hardwood floors. Unlike his brother's stark, intimidating workspace, Derek's office reflected a more artistic sensibility, shelves of leather-bound books, abstract paintings in warm colors, and a battered leather couch that looked genuinely comfortable rather than designed to impress. Derek himself stood at the window, gazing out at the awakening city, his reflection superimposed over the skyline like a ghost. He turned as Isabel entered, his expression grave. "You found the files, didn't you?" he said without preamble. Isabel closed the door carefully behind her. "How did you know?" "Security logs. I had them flagged to alert me if anyone accessed those specific archives." Derek gestured for her to sit. "What did you make of them?" "They're wrong," Isabel said firmly, her exhaustion from a sleepless night giving way to renewed indignation. "My mother is not a thief or a murderer." Derek studied her for a long moment. "I don't think so either," he finally said, moving to his desk to retrieve a manila folder. These documents never made it into the official investigation. The folder contained bank statements and internal memos that painted a very different picture than the official record. They suggested that Thomas Sullivan, the former CEO, had been involved in questionable financial dealings with an unnamed Chinese technology firm. More disturbingly, they indicated that the company's then head of security, George Lawson, had been aware of these dealings. "My father was not an entirely ethical businessman," Derek said quietly. "He made decisions that compromised people, including, I suspect, your mother." "Why are you showing me this?" Isabel asked, struggling to process the implications. "You barely know me." Derek's smile held no humor. "Let's just say I have my own reasons to question Lawson's version of events. He's been my brother's right-hand man for 20 years, steering company policy in ways that have always bothered me." "Does William know about this?" "My brother sees what he wants to see," Derek replied, a hint of bitterness creeping into his voice. "He idolized our father and trusted Lawson's mentorship after father died. William was barely 30 when he took over as CEO, ambitious but inexperienced." A knock at the door interrupted them. Derek quickly slid the folder into his desk drawer as William Sullivan himself entered, his piercing gaze taking in the scene with obvious disapproval. "I thought the interpreter was preparing for the Liang Long call," he said, addressing Derek while barely acknowledging Isabel's presence. "Just clarifying some technical terms," Derek responded smoothly. Isabel was about to head back to her office. William's expression suggested he didn't entirely believe this explanation, but he merely nodded curtly. "Conference room 3, 15 minutes, he instructed Isabel. "Lawson will brief you on protocol." After Isabel left, the brothers' voices rose in what sounded like an argument, though the thick door muffled their words. She hurried to the conference room, mind spinning with new questions. If Elena had been framed for embezzlement, what was the real story? And how did it connect to the current negotiations with Liang Long? The video conference was scheduled to introduce her as the new interpreter, before the more substantive negotiations began later in the week. Isabel sat slightly behind William Sullivan, noting how he dominated the room with his presence alone. George Lawson sat to his right, occasionally whispering something in Sullivan's ear. When the connection was established, 3 Liang Long executives appeared on the large screen. Isabel translated their formal greetings flawlessly, settling into the familiar rhythm of moving between languages. Then the reclusive CEO himself, Mr. Liang, joined the call. Unlike his colleagues, who appeared in well-lit offices, Mr. Liang sat in shadow, his features partially obscured. He wore dark glasses despite being indoors and spoke in a cultivated Beijing accent that suggested extensive education. As Isabel translated his words, something about his mannerisms caught her attention. The way he gestured with his right hand while making a point, the slight tilt of his head when listening, these movements stirred a distant memory. Despite his efforts to conceal his features, something in the visible portion of his face seemed hauntingly familiar. With a jolt that she struggled to hide, Isabel realized he resembled the only photograph she had of her father, supposedly killed in a car accident when she was 5 years old. The same distinctive jawline, the same way of holding his shoulders. It couldn't be possible, and yet as the meeting continued, each mannerism reinforced the impossible connection. Isabel translated automatically, her professional training allowing her to continue, despite the emotional turmoil beneath her composed exterior. After the call ended, William Sullivan nodded with apparent approval. "Your skills are as advertised," he said, the closest thing to a compliment she'd received from him. "Be prepared for more technical content tomorrow." The real negotiations begin then. Isabel returned to her office in a daze, closing the door before allowing her composed facade to crumble. She pulled out her wallet and removed the worn photograph of her father, the only one she possessed. Comparing her memory of Mr. Liang's partially visible features to the photograph, the resemblance seemed even stronger. Her phone rang, displaying Dr. Holmes's number. When she answered, his voice held a new note of interest. "I understand you've begun work on the Liang-Long negotiations," he said without preamble. "I'd be very interested in hearing the details of their patent licensing proposal." Isabel's grip tightened on the phone. "That information is confidential. I signed an agreement." "As is the experimental protocol your mother is receiving," Holmes countered smoothly. "Extraordinary treatments require extraordinary funding, Ms. Reyes. Funding that could disappear as quickly as it appeared." The threat hung in the air between them. Isabel ended the call without responding, her mind racing to find a way out of the trap closing around her. Her mother needed the treatment, but industrial espionage could result in criminal charges. A soft knock at her door revealed Victoria Blackwood, Sullivan's fiancée, impeccably dressed in a designer suit that probably cost more than Isabel's annual rent. Her diamond engagement ring caught the light as she closed the door behind her. "Ms. Reyes," Victoria said, her voice cultured and cool, "I hope I'm not interrupting your work." "Not at all," Isabel replied cautiously. "What can I help you with, Ms. Blackwood?" Victoria perched on the edge of the visitor's chair, her posture perfect. "Let's dispense with pretense, shall we? I've had you investigated." Isabel's stomach tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. "May I ask why?" "William has a blind spot when it comes to business," Victoria said, studying her manicured nails. "He sees opportunities but misses threats. I, on the other hand, excel at identifying potential complications." "And I'm a complication?" Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. "A waitress with perfect Mandarin who appears just as we're finalizing a deal with Liang Long? A woman whose mother was implicated in a financial scandal at this very company 20 years ago? Yes, I'd call that a complication." The revelation that Victoria knew about her mother shocked Isabel, but she fought to maintain her composure. "I was hired because of my language skills, nothing more." "Perhaps." Victoria stood, smoothing her already perfect skirt. "But I'll be watching you, Ms. Reyes. One misstep, one hint that you're more than you appear, and I'll make sure you never work in this city again." She moved to the door, then paused. "Oh, and your mother's doctor, Raymond Holmes. Interesting man. Did you know he consults for several pharmaceutical companies that compete directly with Sullivan Industries' medical technology division?" After Victoria left, Isabel sat frozen, the pieces of an increasingly complex puzzle shifting in her mind. Dr. Holmes's interest in the negotiations, Victoria's threats, Derek's suspicions about Lawson, her mother's past at Sullivan Industries, and the unsettling resemblance between Mr. Liang and her supposedly dead father. How could these disparate elements possibly connect? The answer, she suspected, lay buried in events 20 years ago, events that now threatened to destroy her present and future. Mochi the cat appeared suddenly on her windowsill, somehow having navigated the skyscraper's exterior. His amber eyes regarded her with ancient wisdom as he pawed at the glass. Isabel let him in, finding comfort in his rumbling purr as she faced the impossible choices before her. The Sullivan Industries private jet gleamed in the early morning sun, its sleek lines promising swift escape from the complications that had ensnared Isabel's life. She stood on the tarmac, overnight bag clutched in one hand, her other hand holding her phone with the hospital on speed dial. The trip to Beijing had been accelerated after yesterday's video conference, William Sullivan insisting they needed face-to-face negotiations to close the deal. Second thoughts? Derek Sullivan appeared beside her, his own carry-on slung casually over his shoulder. His presence on the trip had been a last-minute addition, one that clearly irritated his brother, but provided Isabel with unexpected relief. "Just worried about my mother," she admitted. "I've never been away from her since her diagnosis." Derek's expression softened. "I arranged for a private nurse to supplement the hospital staff while we're gone. Her name is Sophia Chen, experienced in cardiac care and fluent in both English and Mandarin." Isabel stared at him, momentarily speechless. "Why would you do that?" "Let's just say I'm settling old debts," he replied cryptically. "Your mother was wronged by my family once. I don't intend to let it happen again." Before she could press him for details, William Sullivan emerged from his town car, George Lawson trailing in his wake like a particularly persistent shadow. Victoria Blackwood was conspicuously absent, attending a charity gala in the Hamptons, according to the Morning Society pages. "We're on a schedule," William announced, striding past them toward the waiting jet. "Wheels up in 10 minutes. The interior of the aircraft revealed luxury beyond Isabel's experience: buttery leather seats, polished wood tables, and attentive staff who offered champagne before takeoff. Isabel declined, accepting sparkling water instead. She needed absolute clarity for what lay ahead. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Isabel excused herself to visit the lavatory. There, in the brief privacy it afforded, she retrieved her phone and found 3 messages waiting. One from the hospital confirming her mother was stable, one from Dr. Holmes demanding an update on the negotiations, and most puzzlingly, one from an unknown number containing only geographic coordinates and the message, "When you arrive in Beijing, come alone. Your father is waiting." Isabel's hands trembled as she stared at the message. It couldn't be possible. Her father had died. There had been a funeral, though she remembered little of it beyond her mother's quiet weeping and the scent of incense. And yet, the resemblance between Mr. Liang and her father's photograph was undeniable. When she returned to her seat, she found William Sullivan had moved to sit across from her, technical documents spread across the table between them. "I want to review the patent specifics before we land," he said without looking up. "Your translations were adequate, but I need to ensure you understand the context." For the next 3 hours, Isabel immersed herself in the complex language of semiconductor technology and intellectual property law. William proved to be a demanding but surprisingly effective teacher, his explanations precise and comprehensive. Despite his brusque manner, Isabel glimpsed why he had ascended to such heights. His intellect was formidable, his grasp of complex concepts impressive. "You're a quick study," he commented as they finished, the grudging admiration in his tone catching Isabel off guard. "Most people can't keep up with the technical nuances." "I've always had an ear for languages, including the language of technology," Isabel replied, organizing the documents into neat stacks. "My mother used to say I could hear the patterns in words before I understood their meaning." Something flickered across Sullivan's face at the mention of her mother, so brief Isabel might have imagined it. "Your mother," he said after a moment, his tone carefully neutral. "She's ill, I understand." Isabel nodded, surprised he knew or cared. "A rare form of cardiomyopathy. The standard treatments weren't effective." Sullivan studied her with an intensity that made Isabel want to look away, but she held his gaze. "And now she's receiving experimental treatment from Dr. Raymond Holmes," he said, the statement framed almost as an accusation. "Yes," Isabel confirmed, sensing dangerous currents beneath this seemingly casual conversation. "Dr. Holmes was recommended by her primary physician." "Was he?" Sullivan's tone made it clear this wasn't a question. He gathered the documents with decisive movements. "Get some rest. We land in 5 hours and the Chinese delegation won't wait for you to recover from jet lag." After he returned to his original seat, Derek slid into the place his brother had vacated. "Well, that looked intense," he commented, keeping his voice low. "What did my charming brother want?" "To review patent terminology," Isabel replied, then hesitated before adding, "And he asked about my mother. Specifically about her doctor." Derek's expression grew serious. "William asked about your mother's doctor. That's unexpected." Why would he care who treats my mother? I'm not sure, Derek admitted, but Raymond Holmes has connections to Sullivan Industries. He conducted clinical trials for some of our medical technology patents a few years ago. He paused, considering his next words carefully. There were ethical concerns about his methods. Nothing that could be proven, but enough that my brother distanced the company from him officially. Officially? Isabel caught the qualifier. Derek glanced toward where his brother sat reviewing documents, head bent in concentration. Let's just say that in the Sullivan family, official statements and private arrangements don't always align. As the plane began its descent into Beijing Capital International Airport, Isabel gazed out at the sprawling cityscape below, its ancient hutongs and modern skyscrapers coexisting in uneasy harmony. Somewhere in this vast city, answers awaited about her mother, about Sullivan Industries, and most incredibly, about a father she had believed dead for 20 years. The Lianglong corporate headquarters occupied a gleaming tower in Beijing's financial district, its architecture a blend of traditional Chinese elements and ultra-modern design. As their delegation was escorted through security, Isabel noticed the subtle signals of extreme wealth jade accents, museum-quality art pieces casually displayed in hallways, security systems so advanced they were nearly invisible. The executive who greeted them introduced himself as Zhang Wei, Lianglong's chief operating officer. He spoke perfect English, rendering Isabel's services unnecessary as they exchanged pleasantries. Yet she noted how his gaze lingered on her face with quiet assessment, his expression revealing nothing. Mr. Liang sends his regrets, Zhang explained, as they were seated in a conference room with sweeping views of the city. He is delayed by personal matters, but looks forward to joining us this evening for dinner. William Sullivan's displeasure manifested in a tightening of his jaw, but he maintained his diplomatic veneer. I trust nothing serious has detained him. Family matters, Zhang replied with a slight smile. Mr. Liang values family connections above all else. The morning passed in preliminary discussions, Isabel translating whenever the conversation shifted to Mandarin, which happened with increasing frequency as technical details were debated. She noticed George Lawson watching her intently during these exchanges, as though expecting her to mistranslate deliberately. During a break, Isabel slipped away to a quiet corridor, ostensibly to make a call to the hospital. As she confirmed her mother's stable condition with Nurse Chen, she noticed a small golden cat figurine placed in a decorative alcove, its amber eyes seeming to follow her movements. Something about it reminded her of Mochi, whose sudden appearances at her office window had never been adequately explained. Admiring our guardian? Zhang Wei's voice startled her. He gestured to the cat figurine. It's said to protect against deception and bring hidden truths to light. It's beautiful, Isabel replied, tucking her phone away. It reminds me of a therapy cat at my mother's hospital. Cats choose those who need their wisdom, Zhang said cryptically. Then, switching to Mandarin so rapid and colloquial that no one without native-level fluency could follow, he added, The coordinates you received go there tonight at 9. Come alone. What you seek has been waiting for you longer than you know. Before Isabel could respond, he was already walking away, rejoining the group as though nothing unusual had transpired. She stood, frozen, mind racing. How did he know about the coordinates? And what exactly was she seeking? That evening, the delegation was escorted to an exclusive restaurant in a restored courtyard house, where private dining rooms surrounded a central garden illuminated by paper lanterns. The atmosphere was designed to impress. From the antique furniture to the attentive service, Isabel found herself seated between Derek Sullivan and George Lawson, an arrangement that left her constantly tense. Mr. Liang will join us shortly, Zhang informed them as the first course arrived, delicate dumplings shaped like lotus blossoms. He apologizes for the delay. William Sullivan raised his glass in a practiced gesture. 2 successful partnerships, he toasted in carefully pronounced Mandarin, that made Isabel hide a smile at his American accent. As they dined on course after exquisite course, Isabel felt the weight of the evening's impending meeting pressing upon her. At 9 o'clock she would need to find an excuse to slip away, to follow mysterious coordinates to a meeting that could change everything she believed about her family. When Mr. Liang finally arrived, the room fell silent. Despite his photos in business publications, few had met the reclusive billionaire in person. He entered without fanfare, a slender man in his 50s, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit. Though he no longer wore the dark glasses from the video conference, the restaurant's atmospheric lighting still cast partial shadows across his features. "Mr. Sullivan," he greeted, his voice sending a shock of recognition through Isabel. "Thank you for making the journey. I hope you found our preliminary discussions productive." As Isabel rose to perform introductions, Mr. Liang's gaze met hers, and for a breathless moment, the years fell away. Though older, more weathered by time and experience, the eyes that looked back at her were unmistakably those from the photograph she had carried all these years, her father's eyes. The antique clock in the corner of the private dining room struck 9, its soft chime almost lost beneath the murmur of conversation. Isabel excused herself with a practiced smile, claiming a need for fresh air after the rich meal. Derek's concerned glance followed her, but no one objected to her momentary absence. In the restaurant's tranquil garden, Isabel checked the coordinates once more, confirming they led to a location less than a kilometer away. The evening air carried the scent of jasmine and distant rain as she slipped through the ornate gate, hailing a taxi with hands that refused to remain steady. The coordinates led to an old tea house tucked away in a quiet hutong, its weathered wooden sign barely visible in the gentle glow of paper lanterns. Inside, time seemed to slow, the modern world held at bay by polished wood floors, worn smooth by generations of footsteps, and the delicate aroma of oolong tea brewing in traditional clay pots. A young woman in a simple kipao approached, bowing slightly. "You are expected," she said in Mandarin, leading Isabel through the main room to a private parlor at the back of the building. The man who rose to greet her was both a stranger and achingly familiar. 20 years had etched lines around his eyes and mouth, had salted his once black hair with distinguished grey, but there was no mistaking those Aisha eyes, inherited along with his stubborn chin and quick mind. "Isabel," he said, her name a prayer on his lips. "My daughter." She stood frozen in the doorway, a lifetime of emotions colliding within her chest, grief for wasted years, anger at abandonment, desperate hope that there might be an explanation that could heal the wound of his absence. "You're alive," she finally managed, the words inadequate for the magnitude of the moment. "All this time, please," he gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit. There is much to explain and little time to do so." Isabel moved woodenly to the chair, her body responding to commands while her mind struggled to process reality shifting beneath her. The tea ceremony that followed gave her precious moments to gather her composure, watching as his hands so like her own prepared the steaming cups with practiced precision. "I never died in that car accident," he began, his voice low and steady. "That story was created to protect you and your mother." "Protect us from what?" Isabel demanded, anger finally breaking through shock. "Do you have any idea what we've been through? Mom is dying and you've been alive all this time as what? A Chinese tech billionaire?" Pain flashed across his features. "Elena is dying." He set down his cup with a trembling hand. "I didn't know. Our arrangement was that we would have no contact for her safety and yours." "Arrangement with whom?" "With Sullivan Industries." He sighed deeply, a sound weighted with years of regret. 20 years ago, I worked as a technology consultant for both Sullivan and what was then a small Chinese startup called Liang Digital. Thomas Sullivan, William's father, discovered I was passing proprietary information to both companies. "You were a corporate spy?" Isabel couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. "I was idealistic and foolish," he corrected. "I believed technology should transcend borders, that advancements could benefit humanity, regardless of who owned the patents." A bitter smile twisted his lips. "Thomas Sullivan did not share my philosophy. So you faked your death and abandoned us?" The hurt child in Isabel couldn't remain silent. "No," he said firmly. "That came later. When Thomas discovered what I was doing, he threatened to have me prosecuted for industrial espionage, a charge that carried significant prison time, but he offered me an alternative. If I would provide Sullivan Industries with ongoing intelligence about Chinese technology development, he would keep my betrayal quiet." Isabel's analytical mind began connecting pieces of the puzzle. "So you became a double agent." "Triple, eventually," he corrected with a grimace. "The Chinese government became aware of my activities and applied pressure of their own. I was caught between powerful forces, each demanding loyalty." "What does this have to do with Mom? With Sullivan Industries' accusations against her?" His eyes darkened with old anger. "When I tried to extricate myself from this web, Thomas Sullivan needed a scapegoat. He and George Lawson fabricated evidence implicating your mother in financial fraud. They threatened to have her prosecuted unless I disappeared permanently, and continued working for them from China. They framed her, Isabel whispered, the confirmation of her suspicions bringing no satisfaction. But why fake your death? Why not just leave? Because dead men tell no tales, he said simply. A divorced husband who abandoned his family might someday return with accusations. A dead man's voice is silenced forever. He reached across the table, not quite touching her hand. I made my choice to protect you both. Thomas Sullivan promised Elena would never face charges if I complied, so I died, and Li Feng was born. Li Feng, Isabel repeated, but everyone calls you Mr. Liang. Liang is the company name, he explained. Few know my personal name for security and privacy. Isabel's mind raced ahead, making connections with dizzying speed. The merger negotiations with Sullivan Industries, this isn't just business for you, is it? A smile, her smile, she realized, with a shock curved his lips. You always were brilliant, even as a child. No, this is not merely business. This merger is the culmination of 20 years of planning. Thomas Sullivan is dead, but his son inherited his company and his sins. What are you planning? Isabel asked, suddenly afraid of the answer. Justice, Li Feng replied, his voice hardening. William Sullivan believes he's acquiring valuable semiconductor patents. What he doesn't realize is that Liang Long has been systematically purchasing shares in Sullivan Industries through shell companies for years. Once this merger is complete, we will control 51% of the combined entity. Isabel stared at her father, seeing the ruthless businessman beneath the facade of the long-lost parent. A hostile takeover disguised as a merger. Poetic justice, he corrected. And once we control the company, the truth about Thomas Sullivan's crimes, including what he did to your mother, will be revealed. And Dr. Holmes? Isabel asked. Where does he fit into this? Li Feng's expression turned grim. Raymond Holmes is George Lawson's cousin. His sudden interest in your mother's case is no coincidence. They suspect I'm alive and are using Elena to flush me out or to ensure your cooperation in their counterintelligence. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Holmes has been pressuring me for information about the negotiations. And I imagine he's been manipulating your mother's treatment as leverage. Li Feng's hands clenched into fists. Some patterns never change. The Sullivans still use the same tactics as 20 years ago. Not all Sullivans, Isabel said, thinking of Derek's quiet assistance. William's brother has been helping me. He provided documents suggesting my mother was framed. Li Feng nodded thoughtfully. Derek Sullivan was always the better man. His father considered him too soft for business, a disappointment compared to the ruthless William. Isabel's phone vibrated with a text from Derek. Where are you? William's suspicious. Return quickly. I have to go back, she said, rising reluctantly. They'll notice a longer absence. Li Feng stood as well, hesitating before asking, May I see her? Your mother. The simple question, laden with 2 decades of longing, stripped away the businessman to reveal the man who had once loved her mother. Isabel thought of Elena in her hospital bed, growing weaker despite experimental treatments. She deserves to know you're alive, Isabel said finally. Whether she wants to see you, that will be her choice. Li Feng nodded, acceptance and hope warring in his expression. I've arranged secure methods of communication, he said, sliding a small device across the table that resembled an ordinary key fob. This will allow us to exchange messages without detection. As Isabel prepared to leave, he added, Be careful with the Sullivans, all of them. Trust no one completely, not even those who seem to be allies. The taxi ride back to the restaurant passed in a blur of racing thoughts and emotional turmoil. When Isabel returned to the private dining room, conversations paused momentarily as all eyes turned to her. Feeling better? William Sullivan asked, his tone pleasant but his gaze calculating. Much better, thank you, Isabel replied with a composure she didn't feel. Just needed some fresh air. As she resumed her seat, she noticed George Lawson studying her intently. Had her absence been too long? Did her face betray the emotional earthquake she'd just experienced? You missed Mr. Liang's departure, Lawson commented. He was called away on urgent business. Isabel nodded, maintaining her professional demeanor despite knowing the urgent business had been meeting with her. I hope we'll have another opportunity to continue discussions. Oh, I'm certain of it, William Sullivan said. raising his glass in a toast that seemed more challenge than celebration. Two unexpected connections. May they prove profitable for all involved. As glasses clinked around the table, Isabel met Derek's questioning gaze across the candle-lit space. His slight nod conveyed both concern and curiosity, questions that would have to wait for a more private moment. The evening concluded with promises of continued negotiations the following day. As they departed the restaurant, Isabel sensed she stood at a crossroads. On one path lay loyalty to her employer and the experimental treatment keeping her mother alive. On the other, a father returned from the dead and the chance to clear her mother's name after decades of undeserved shame. In her hotel room that night, Isabel sat before the window overlooking Beijing's glittering skyline, the device from her father clutched in her hand. Outside, neon signs pulsed like the heartbeats of a city that never truly slept. Somewhere in that sprawling metropolis, a man who shared her blood orchestrated a complex revenge against the family that had separated them. As rain began to fall, streaking the glass with silver tears, Isabel's phone rang with a call from the hospital in New York. Her mother's condition had suddenly worsened. Dr. Holmes was recommending immediate intervention with an experimental protocol that could save her life or end it. The procedure carries significant risks, Doctor, Holmes explained, his voice clinically detached. But I need your authorization to proceed. Isabel closed her eyes, feeling the weight of impossible choices crushing her chest. Can it wait until I return to New York? I'm afraid not, Holmes replied. Your mother may not have that long without intervention. As Isabel hung up, a message appeared on the device her father had given her. Holmes is lying. Elena is stable. They're trying to force your hand. Trust no one from Sullivan Industries. Dawn broke over Beijing with watercolor strokes of pink and gold, painting the ancient city in gentle light. Isabel hadn't slept, her night spent in anxious contemplation as she weighed impossible choices. The device from her father lay on the hotel nightstand, beside Sullivan Industries' confidential merger documents, physical embodiments of her divided loyalties. A soft knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. Cautiously approaching, she checked the peephole to find Derek Sullivan waiting, his expression tense. We need to talk, he said, when she opened the door. Not here. Meet me in the hotel garden in 10 minutes. Come alone. The garden occupied a central courtyard, a tranquil oasis of carefully tended bamboo and flowering plum trees surrounding a koi pond. Derek stood at the water's edge, tossing occasional crumbs to the orange and white fish that gathered expectantly. You disappeared for nearly an hour last night, he said without preamble as she approached. Want to tell me where you really went? Isabel studied his face, searching for signs of duplicity. Her father's warning about trusting no Sullivan echoed in her mind, yet Derek had been her only ally in this increasingly dangerous game. I saw my father, she finally said, the words still strange on her tongue. He's alive, Derek. He's Li Feng, the real power behind Liang Long. Derek showed no surprise, merely nodded slowly. I suspected as much. The timing was too convenient, and William's been unusually obsessed with keeping you close during these negotiations. You knew? Anger flared momentarily. I had theories, not confirmation. He turned to face her fully. Isabel, you're caught in something much bigger than you realize. This merger isn't what it seems. It's a hostile takeover, she supplied. My father's been planning it for 20 years as revenge for what Thomas Sullivan and George Lawson did to my family. Derek's eyebrows rose slightly. He told you everything then. Not everything, Isabel countered. Just enough to make me question everyone's motives, including yours. Why are you helping me? A weary smile crossed his face. Because 20 years ago, I watched my father and George Lawson destroy an innocent woman's reputation to protect themselves. I was too young, too cowardly to stop it then. He paused, gazing across the garden. I've spent 2 decades trying to build something worthwhile within a company founded on lies. When I saw your name in those old files, I thought perhaps the universe was offering a chance at redemption. The sincerity in his voice rang true, but Isabel had learned to be wary. What about Dr. Holmes? He called last night claiming my mother's condition has worsened. Derek's expression hardened. Raymond Holmes is George Lawson's creature. He's been manipulating your mother's treatment to control you. He pulled out his phone, showing her a series of encrypted messages. I've had a private medical team monitoring your mother's care. She's stable, Isabel. The crisis Holmes described was fabricated. Why would William allow this? Isabel asked, struggling to reconcile the ruthless manipulation with the business genius she'd glimpsed on the plane. "My brother isn't evil," Derek said quietly, "just obsessively dedicated to what he perceives as our father's legacy. He trusts Lawson implicitly and believes the company comes before everything, including basic human decency." A hotel employee approached, bowing slightly. "Ms. Reyes, you have an urgent message at the front desk." The message proved to be a note, written in elegant Mandarin. "Car waiting at East Entrance. Your mother needs you both." However, within 30 minutes, Isabel and Derek were being driven through Beijing's morning traffic in a sleek black sedan with diplomatic plates. Their driver, a silent, efficient woman, navigated the congested streets with practiced ease, eventually turning into an exclusive residential compound in the diplomatic quarter. Li Feng awaited them in a traditional courtyard house, its exterior modest compared to the exquisite interior. Isabel noticed how her father's hands trembled slightly as he greeted them, betraying emotion his composed face did not. "Thank you for coming," he said, leading them to a room where advanced medical equipment surrounded a hospital bed. "I had Elena brought here last night after Dr. Holmes attempted to administer an unauthorized experimental treatment." Isabel rushed to her mother's bedside. Elena Reyes appeared peaceful in sleep, her breathing steady, her color better than Isabel had seen in months. A monitoring device tracked her heart rhythm with reassuring regularity. "Mom?" Isabel whispered, taking her hand. Elena's eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to recognition. "Isabel? How?" "I arranged for her transfer through diplomatic channels," Li Feng explained, standing at a careful distance. "Holmes has been giving her medications designed to maintain her illness rather than cure it." Elena's gaze shifted to the man standing behind her daughter, and decades seemed to fall away as recognition dawned. "Antonio," she breathed, using the name he had abandoned 20 years ago. "Is it really you?" The reunion that followed unfolded with tender intensity. 2 decades of separation dissolved in tears and whispered explanations. Isabel and Derek retreated to give them privacy, finding themselves in a garden where an orange tabby cat, remarkably similar to Mochi, lounged in dappled sunlight. "Your family might actually have a chance at healing," Derek observed, watching the cat stretch lazily. "Mine is about to implode when this merger reveals its true nature." "What will happen to William?" Isabel asked, surprised by her own concern for the man who had been complicit in manipulating her. "He'll fight, lose, and eventually adapt," Derek replied with the certainty of someone who knew his brother well. "William has always defined himself by Sullivan Industries. Without it, he'll need to discover who he really is." "And you? What happens to you when everything falls apart?" Derek smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his face. "I've been preparing for years. The Sullivan Foundation is legally separate from the corporation. My personal project focused on educational opportunities for underprivileged students. I'll have plenty to keep me occupied." The cat, which Li Feng later explained, was indeed Mochi's brother, smuggled from the hospital as a therapy companion for Elena, wound around Isabel's ankles, purring loudly. Its presence seemed to anchor the moment, a tangible reminder that some connections transcended time and distance. "We still have a problem," Isabel said, returning to practical concerns. "William and Lawson will be expecting us at today's negotiations." "Actually," Li Feng said, joining them in the garden, "the negotiations have been moved forward. They're happening now, without Sullivan or Lawson present." Inside Li Feng's home office, screens displayed video feeds of conference rooms where Lianglong executives were simultaneously meeting with Sullivan Industries board members around the world. The culmination of 20 years of planning was unfolding with the precision of a chess grandmaster's endgame. By this evening, the merger will be approved under terms very different from what William Sullivan believes, Li Feng explained, his voice containing neither triumph nor malice, merely weary satisfaction. "The evidence of Thomas Sullivan's crime, including the framing of Elena, has already been provided to the board and regulatory authorities. William will fight this," Derek warned, "and Lawson is dangerous when cornered." "I'm counting on it," Li Feng replied with a grim smile. "Their response will only confirm their guilt." As predicted, chaos erupted at Sullivan Industries as the true nature of the merger became apparent. William Sullivan's furious calls went strategically unanswered. George Lawson, desperate to contain the situation, made a critical error. He ordered Dr. Holmes to erase all records of Elena Reyes's manipulated treatment. This attempt at covering their tracks provided the final evidence needed. By nightfall, George Lawson had been taken into custody by international authorities, charged with fraud, conspiracy, and medical malpractice through his connection to Holmes. The doctor himself had fled, only to be apprehended at the Canadian border 2 days later. William Sullivan, faced with incontrovertible evidence of his father's crimes and his own unwitting complicity, made no public statement. 3 days after the merger was completed, his resignation from all positions at the newly formed Liang Sullivan Global Technology was announced in a terse press release. For Isabel, watching these corporate machinations unfold from the peaceful sanctuary of her father's home, the true miracle was her mother's rapid improvement under proper treatment. The illness that had consumed years of their lives began to retreat, not cured but finally managed correctly. The original diagnosis was accurate, explained Dr. Lin, the renowned cardiologist Li Feng had brought in to oversee Elena's care. But the treatment protocol was deliberately designed to create dependency rather than recovery. With proper medication, your mother should have many healthy years ahead. On their final evening in Beijing, before returning to New York with her parents, Isabel found Derek in the garden, feeding the koi as he had in the hotel courtyard days earlier. "I received the foundation reorganization paperwork today," he said as she joined him. "The Sullivan name has been removed. From now on it's simply the Bridge Foundation." "Appropriate," Isabel commented, "building connections, spanning divides." Derek's smile held both sadness and hope. "I spoke with William yesterday. How is he?" "Angry, betrayed, beginning perhaps to question the values he's built his life around." Derek tossed a final crumb to the fish. "He asked about you, actually. Said you were the only person involved who never lied to him." Isabel considered this with surprise. "Will he be all right eventually?" "I think so. Our family has never lacked resilience, just conscience sometimes." Derek turned to face her fully. "And you? What happens next for Isabel Reyes?" The question hung between them, laden with possibilities neither had voiced during the intense days of crisis. Isabel thought of Columbia University, of linguistics programs still accepting applications for the fall semester, of a life no longer constrained by hospital bills and desperate measures. "I think," she said slowly, "it's time I finished what I started." 1 year later, Golden Leaf Restaurant hadn't changed. The same crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across white tablecloths, the same muted conversations of New York's elite blended with the gentle clink of fine china. Isabel Reyes moved through the familiar space with confidence, no longer in a waitress uniform, but dressed in an elegantly tailored suit. "Ms. Reyes," Patrick, the floor manager who had fired her a year earlier, approached with nervous deference. "Your table is ready. The other guests have already arrived." "Thank you, Patrick," she replied with a gracious smile that held no trace of resentment. The past year had taught her the futility of harboring grudges. The private dining room overlooked Central Park, its autumn colors creating a fiery backdrop against the setting sun. Elena Reyes sat at the head of the table, her restored health evident in her vibrant smile and the energy with which she gestured during conversation. Beside her sat Li Feng, gradually growing comfortable in his role as Antonio Reyes once more, his fingers entwined with his wife's in casual intimacy. Derek Sullivan rose as Isabel entered, pulling out her chair with old-world courtesy. "The woman of the hour," he announced, "Columbia's most promising graduate linguistics student, already being courted by the UN for her simultaneous translation skills." Isabel laughed, the sound free and easy. "Let me complete my master's program before you volunteer me for international diplomacy." The final guest remained seated, his posture stiff despite the relaxed atmosphere. William Sullivan had lost weight in the past year, his once commanding presence muted by public disgrace and private reckoning. Yet something in his eyes had changed, a hardness replaced by uncomfortable self-awareness. "Congratulations on your academic achievements," he offered, as Isabel took her seat. "Derek speaks highly of your research." The conversation flowed more easily than might have been expected given their complicated history. The newly formed Liang Sullivan Global Technology had flourished under Li Feng's leadership, with unexpected input from William, whose technical expertise had proven valuable in advisory roles far from corporate politics. "The medical division has completely restructured its research protocols," William explained during the main course. addressing Elena directly. The oversight committee you suggested has eliminated the kind of manipulation that happened in your case. Elena nodded, her expression thoughtful. Healing comes in many forms. Some wounds require more than medicine. The wisdom in her simple statement hung in the air, acknowledging the complex journey of recovery they had all undertaken: Elena's physical healing, Li Feng's reintegration into a life abandoned decades earlier, Isabel's return to academic pursuits, and the Sullivan brothers' respective reckonings with their family legacy. Mochi, now officially registered as a therapy cat, but practically a family member, sprawled contentedly in a patch of sunlight near Elena's chair. His brother remained in Beijing, the ocean separating them much as circumstances had once separated the humans who cared for them. "I have news," Derek announced as dessert was served. "The Bridge Foundation has secured funding for a new scholarship program specifically for linguistic students focusing on medical translation. We're calling it the Reyes Family Scholarship." "That's wonderful," Isabel said, genuinely moved by the gesture. "Language barriers in healthcare can have devastating consequences." "Indeed," Li Feng agreed. "As we all learned, words misunderstood or deliberately mistranslated can alter lives forever." William shifted uncomfortably at this indirect reference to the past. "Speaking of words," he said, clearly changing the subject, "I understand your research focuses on how technical language evolves across cultures. I might have some insights from the semiconductor industry if that would be useful." The offer, awkward but sincere, represented William's halting attempts to contribute positively where he once had wielded power. Isabel accepted with gracious understanding of what the gesture cost his pride. As evening deepened, casting the city in amber and gold, Isabel excused herself briefly, stepping onto the restaurant's small balcony for a moment of quiet reflection. The year's journey from waitress to graduate student, from daughter of a dying woman to bridge between healing families, seemed both improbable and inevitable in retrospect. Derek joined her, respecting her silence as they watched lights illuminate Manhattan's skyline. "Penny for your thoughts," he finally said. "I was thinking about that night, answering the phone in Mandarin, being fired, receiving William's business card." Isabel smiled at the memory that had once seemed so catastrophic. "How differently everything might have turned out if I'd let the call go to voicemail." "Some connections are meant to be made," Derek replied, his hand finding hers in the gathering darkness. Their fingers intertwined naturally, a gesture that had become familiar over months of cautious courtship. Even when the universe takes Byzantine roots to create them. Inside, William was engaged in earnest conversation with Li Feng about semiconductor applications in medical technology, while Elena watched with the serene expression of a woman who had traversed the desert of loss and emerged in an unexpected oasis. "Do you think they'll ever truly be comfortable with each other?" Isabel asked, nodding toward her father and William. "Probably not," Derek admitted. "But they're finding common ground in creating something better than what came before. That's more than I ever expected." The restaurant's maitre d' appeared at the balcony entrance. "Ms. Reyes, there's a call for you at the front desk. Something about a UN translation opportunity in Geneva." Isabel glanced at Derek, who smiled encouragingly. "Go ahead. The world needs your voice." As she moved to take the call that might open yet another door in her expanding life, Isabel passed her mother, who reached out to squeeze her hand. "Remember, Anak," Elena said softly, using the Filipino term of endearment, "every language you speak gives you another soul, another way to connect hearts across distances." In that moment, surrounded by people whose lives had been shattered and rebuilt through truth finally spoken, Isabel understood that her gift for languages had never been merely academic. It was, and would always be, about translation in its deepest sense, bridging divides, healing misunderstandings, creating connections where silence or falsehood had prevailed. The irony wasn't lost on her, how a waitress answering a phone in Chinese had unraveled decades of deception and created space for redemption. How the same restaurant that had once dismissed her now welcomed her as an honored guest. How a family built on lies and another fractured by secrets had found their way to a shared table of tentative hope. As Isabel picked up the phone, Mochi appeared mysteriously at her feet, amber eyes reflecting wisdom beyond human understanding. Some connections, she realized, transcended explanation, like a cat appearing on high-rise windowsills, or love resurging after 20 years of absence, or forgiveness blossoming in soil once poisoned by betrayal. "This is Isabel Reyes," she said into the receiver, her voice clear and confident, ready to translate whatever came next. Later that night, in the apartment she now shared with her reunited parents, Isabel found her mother in the study, organizing old photographs into an album. Li Feng had fallen asleep on the sofa, Mochi curled against his chest as though they'd never been separated. "Look what I found," Elena said, holding up a faded picture of herself as a young accountant, standing proudly in front of Sullivan Industries 2 decades earlier. "Sometimes, life brings us full circle in ways we could never imagine." Isabel sat beside her mother, taking in the photograph of a confident young woman who couldn't possibly know the challenges that awaited her, the loss, the struggle, the eventual healing. "Are you happy, Mom?" she asked simply, "with how everything turned out?" Elena considered the question, her fingers tracing the photograph's edge. "I spent 20 years believing your father had died, that my career had been destroyed by my own failings, that happiness was something other people experienced." She looked toward the living room where her husband slept peacefully. "Now I know that the truth, however painful, brings its own kind of freedom, and that sometimes what seems like an ending is merely a difficult passage to something better." The wisdom in her mother's words resonated deeply. Isabel thought of the Sullivans, William finding purpose beyond power, Derek building bridges instead of empires, and her own journey from anxious caretaker to confident scholar. Each of them had weathered their own difficult passage, emerging transformed. "The Chinese have a saying," Isabel murmured, remembering her linguistic studies. "Failure is not falling down but refusing to get up." Elena smiled, the expression illuminating her face with the inner strength that had sustained her through decades of adversity. "We got up, didn't we? All of us, in our own ways." As midnight approached, Isabel stepped onto the apartment's small balcony, gazing at the city that had witnessed her family's unraveling and unlikely restoration. From somewhere nearby, a cat's meow echoed in the darkness. Perhaps Mochi, perhaps some feline cousin carrying messages between worlds. The phone call from the UN had indeed been an offer 6 months in Geneva, translating for international medical conferences, building linguistic bridges between cultures. Derek had already suggested visiting her there, their relationship unfolding with thoughtful patience. Life stretched before her with possibilities that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. Yet Isabel understood now that the true gift wasn't the opportunities themselves, but the wisdom to recognize them, the courage to embrace them, and the heart to share them. A soft breeze carried the scent of autumn endings and beginnings intertwined, like the languages she moved between effortlessly. In that moment, Isabel Reyes' daughter, scholar, bridge builder felt the fullness of her own story, still unfolding but already rich with meaning. Some might call it coincidence that a waitress answering a call in Chinese had set such momentous events in motion. Others might name it destiny. Isabel preferred to think of it as translation in its purest form, transforming misunderstanding into connection, silence into speech, separation into reunion. And in a world too often divided by language, culture, and history, such translation was perhaps the most important work of all. My friends, we've come to the end of the story. Did you like it? What lesson can you bring to life from this story? Leave it here in the comments. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and watch this video that's playing on your screen. This story will impact you. See you next time.